I never thought my life would unravel because of love. Or maybe I should say, because of betrayal. When I look back now, the signs were always there. Subtle, almost invisible, but back then I brushed them off. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Mark wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend, my partner of 7 years, the man who had promised me the world on our wedding day. We lived in a modest but cozy house just outside the city. Nothing too fancy, but it was ours. The walls had seen laughter, arguments, late-night movies, and quiet Sunday mornings. If someone had walked in, they would have said we looked like the perfect couple. But perfection is fragile, and sometimes it takes just one crack for everything to shatter. The subtle changes started small, a change so quiet that at first, I almost felt guilty for even noticing it. Mark had always been affectionate. Morning kisses, random hugs in the kitchen, silly texts during the day. But then it all slowed. The hugs became quick pats on the shoulder. The kisses turned into polite pecks. And the texts, they stopped altogether. I told myself, he's just stressed. Work is tough. Don't overthink it. But then came the late nights. He started working overtime. First once or twice a week. Then almost every night. He'd come home past midnight, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual. When I asked, he laughed it off. Clients, babe. You know how it is. Networking, dinners, boring stuff. His smile was convincing. Too convincing. A whisper of doubt. One evening, while he was showering, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I'd never been the type to check his phone. We trusted each other. But something about the way my heart jumped into my throat told me this wasn't just an ordinary text. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Can't stop thinking about last night, kiss marked. My blood ran cold. I wanted to open the phone, to scroll, to confirm my worst fear. But my hands trembled so badly I couldn't. Instead, I placed it back exactly where it was and pretended I hadn't seen anything. When Mark came out, towel around his waist, he smiled at me and kissed my forehead like nothing had changed. I forced a smile back, but my chest ached with a knot of suspicion. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the text again and again, each time stabbing deeper. The breaking point. Weeks passed. My suspicion grew into a shadow that followed me everywhere. I started noticing more. The way he guarded his phone, the quick dismissive tone when I asked about his day. The sudden new shirts in his wardrobe that I hadn't seen before. One night, he came home unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. He set his keys down, humming a song, and poured himself a drink. "What's got you in such a good mood?" asked, trying to sound casual. "Just things at work. Big deal coming through. Might mean a promotion." But his eyes avoided mine. That's when it hit me. He wasn't humming from joy. He was humming because he was hiding something. I realized then, I couldn't keep pretending. I had to know the truth. Following the trail, it started small. When he left for work dinners, I noted the time he left, the time he came home, and the clothes he wore. Then I checked his laundry. On one shirt, I found faint traces of perfume. Floral, sweet, and definitely not mine. The final straw came one Thursday night. He said he was at a meeting downtown. I waited 15 minutes after he left, grabbed my coat, and drove. My heart pounded the entire way, half hoping I was wrong, half dreading that I wasn't. I parked a block away from the hotel where he'd said the meeting was. And there he was, Mark, standing outside under the glow of a streetlight. Not alone, with a woman. She was younger, stylish, and laughing at something he'd said. And then he kissed her. My world stopped. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, tears blurring my vision. There it was. Proof. The man I loved, the man who promised me forever, was kissing another woman like I didn't exist. Silence and strategy. I didn't confront him that night. I drove home, sat in the dark, and cried until my body ached. But somewhere in that sea of tears, something shifted inside me. I realized screaming, begging, or accusing wouldn't change anything. If he had chosen her, then he had already left me in his heart. No, if I wanted justice, if I wanted closure, I had to be smarter. So I wiped my tears, looked in the mirror, and whispered to myself, don't react. Plan. Because this wasn't just the story of how I got cheated on. It was about how I would get my revenge. And trust me, the revenge would be worth every single sleepless night. I woke up the next morning with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. But inside me, something had changed. The heartbreak was still there, sharp and raw, but layered over it was a cold, burning focus. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman with a plan. Mark greeted me in the kitchen like nothing had happened. He poured his coffee, kissed my cheek, and asked if I needed gas in my car. My hands shook as I buttered my toast, but I forced a smile. Thanks, but I'm good, I said softly. He had no idea that I had followed him last night. No idea that I had seen everything. And that ignorance would be his downfall. Playing the part. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. The devoted wife, the caring partner, the woman who didn't suspect a thing. I laughed at his jokes, cooked his favorite meals, even ironed his shirts before he left for his so-called late meetings. But behind the mask, I was documenting everything. Every late-night return, every suspicious text, every unexplained receipt. I created a private folder on my laptop labeled recipes. Inside it, screenshots, photos, dates, times. Proof that could crush him if I needed to. Why? Because revenge without evidence is just anger. But revenge with evidence, that's power. The slip-up. One Friday evening, Mark was in the shower when his phone buzzed again. This time I didn't hesitate. I unlocked it using the passcode I'd memorized long ago. My birthday. He'd never bothered to change it. The screen lit up with a message from her. Her name was Sophie. Can't wait to spend the weekend with you. Finally, just us. My stomach twisted. Weekend. He'd told me he was going on a business trip out of town. I scrolled. Dozens of messages, each one worse than the last. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future. Talking about apartments, vacations, even children. For a moment, I thought I might vomit. But instead, I clicked the side button, took screenshots, and emailed them to myself. My hands were steady now. Cold. By the time he came out of the shower, I was smiling again, asking if he wanted steak for dinner. The confidant. I couldn't carry this weight alone, so I confided in one person. My best friend, Rachel. We'd been inseparable since college. And if there was anyone who would stand by me, it was her. When I told her, tears streaming down my face, Rachel's jaw clenched. That coward, she spat. What are you going to do? I looked her straight in the eyes. I'm going to ruin him. Not just emotionally. Completely. Rachel's eyebrows arched, but then she smirked. Okay, I'm in. Together we started brainstorming. Not petty revenge. Not keying his car or exposing him on social media. No, this had to be bigger. Martyr. Something he'd never recover from. The setup. Step 1 was simple. Let him dig his own grave. I encouraged his work trips. Even suggested he take longer ones. I pretended not to notice the lipstick stains on his collar. The more comfortable he felt, the bolder he became. Meanwhile, I began preparing my own financial safety net. Quietly moving money, securing my accounts, and contacting a lawyer Rachel had recommended. Because here's what Mark didn't realize. Our house, our savings, even part of his business shares were under my name. He'd signed them over years ago, trusting me, thinking we were a team. That trust would be my weapon. The turning point. The real turning point came one Saturday afternoon. Mark had left for another conference. I told him I'd be visiting my sister. Instead, I drove to the hotel where he was staying with Sophie. I didn't go inside. No, I didn't want a screaming match in a lobby. I wanted proof. So I waited. Sure enough, a few hours later, they walked out together. Hand in hand, laughing, looking like a couple in love. I snapped photos from my car. Him kissing her, her leaning on his shoulder. Both of them walking into a fancy restaurant. My hands didn't shake this time. Felt powerful. Each click of the camera was another nail in his coffin. Holding the cards. That night, I spread everything out on my desk. The screenshots, the receipts, the photos. Timeline of betrayal. It was almost poetic, the way it all fit together. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. No, confrontation is messy. Confrontation gives the guilty a chance to explain, to lie, to twist the story. Instead, I decided on something more devastating. I would wait until the perfect moment. I would let him believe he was in control. And then, when he least expected it, I'd pull the ground from beneath his feet. The mask cracks. Course, pretending takes its toll. One night, Mark came home drunk. He reeked of whiskey and Sophie's perfume. He stumbled into the kitchen, grinning. "You're the best, you know that. Always here, always waiting for me." The words stung, but I smiled sweetly and handed him a glass of water. Inside, my rage boiled like lava. As he collapsed onto the couch, mumbling her name in his half-sleep, I realized something. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't broken. I was dangerous. Because the moment a betrayed woman stops crying is the moment she starts plotting. A dangerous secret. The next morning, Mark left early for work. I stood in the doorway, watching his car disappear down the street. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. Not to him, not to Sophie, but to his business partner. I didn't hit send, not yet, but just typing it felt exhilarating. Because Mark didn't know one thing. His betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. His company, his reputation, his carefully built world. It was tied to me in ways he'd forgotten. And if he thought sleeping with Sophie was his greatest secret, he hadn't considered mine. The cliffhanger. That night, as he slept peacefully beside me, I whispered into the darkness. "You think you've won, Mark. But soon, you'll wish you had never crossed me." I smiled to myself, knowing the clock was ticking. Every lie he told, every kiss he gave her, every time he thought he was untouchable. It was only feeding the storm I was about to unleash. Because this wasn't just about catching a cheater. This was about teaching him, and Sophie, that betraying me came with a cost they could never afford. And soon they'd both find out. I rehearsed the moment in my head 1,000 times. Not the shouting, not the crying. The reveal. Quiet, surgical, public enough to sting, precise enough to destroy everything he had taken for granted. The first move was simple. Leverage. Not brute force, leverage. Years ago, when Mark and I had merged our savings and investments, he trusted me to handle the paperwork. He signed documents during that honeymoon period of us, when loyalty felt like a given. Those signatures mattered. Blah. So I called in favors. Not the dramatic revenge movie kind. Small, legal, boring favors that require patience and exact timing. I met with a lawyer Rachel recommended, laid out the screenshots, the receipts, the photos, everything. The attorney's eyes went cold as she scrolled through the timeline. "You can use this," she said. "But it has to be airtight. No theatrics. We make this clinical. We make it undeniable." We started where it would hurt Mark most. His reputation at work. I drafted a concise, professional email summarizing the evidence. Screenshots of his texts, photographs from the hotel, and most damning of all, expense reports showing dinners and client entertainment billed to his company that directly tied Sophie to his so-called business trips. The receipts were stamped with the company's name. That part required no interpretation. It was paper that burned. I emailed the board and the most important clients, but not in an angry midnight blast. I sent it on a weekday morning at 9. A time executives check their messages and feel the weight of consequences. The subject line read, "Urgent, potential misconduct and conflict of interest, evidence attached." Plain, professional, impossible to ignore. My hands didn't tremble when I hit send. Instead, there was a calmness that surprised me. This was not about revenge the way people imagined. Dramatic confessions or public shaming videos. This was about dismantling the life he had built from the inside out, with tools that match a corporate world. Contracts, audits, shareholders, legal obligations. Within an hour, my phone buzzed. A partner I'd named in the email replied, short and shocked. "We need to pause payments. Call me." Then another. Then Mark's CEO, the man who had mentored him, forwarded the email to legal. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for the next day. Meanwhile, I was careful. I kept my face smooth for friends, for Rachel, for Mark. He still hugged me in the morning, still badgered me about garden seeds, still called me babe. But the world he walked into that week was changing. At the emergency meeting, Mark arrived late, confident. He still thought he could spin a story or buy his way out with excuses. He had always been charming in front of colleagues. But charm doesn't hold up under documents and timestamps. They presented the evidence. First the screenshots, then the receipts, then the photos, then the timeline. Dates matched to expense reports, to hotel bookings, to client calls that never happened. The room fell silent when the receipts showed reimbursements for dinners with Sophie's name as a vendor. You could feel the air change, the slow realization that this was bigger than a personal mistake. This was a potential criminal conflict of interest and misuse of company funds. Mark stammered. He tried the old tricks: denial, minimization, blaming stress. But it was too structured for improvisation. The lawyers asked for records. The auditors asked for access. The board chair, who had always been polite to Mark, looked at him like someone who'd just been shown an old photograph of the man they thought they knew and found a stranger. By the time Sophie's name surfaced in HR files, a contractor turned consultant turned too comfortable guest at company retreats, the company froze all of Mark's privileges. His corporate card was cut. Payments were suspended pending investigation. Clients were notified of a temporary pause in his account handling. Where weeks ago he had authority, now he had silence. Then came the social layer. Word traveled fast. Colleagues who had admired Mark began to whisper. Invitations halted. Investors who once praised his vision requested conversations with the board instead. His phone exploded with calls and messages that were suddenly sharp, not sympathetic. I watched it all unfold from the other room. The man who kissed me goodbye now being told, repeatedly and politely, that he needed to step away. But I didn't stop at the company. If I wanted permanent change, I needed to target the foundations, contracts, assets, and respect. Quietly, I initiated the safety measures I'd prepared. I updated account passwords, ensured certain deeds and shares were in my control, and filed a formal complaint with HR that included the evidence. That complaint triggered an internal investigation and put everything on a legal timeline that would be difficult for Mark to wrench out of. The first public blow was merciless. An industry newsletter, one that my anonymous contact, a disgruntled former client Mark had mishandled years ago, agreed to tip off, ran a small factual piece. Senior manager temporarily suspended amid conflict of interest investigation. The headline didn't scream scandal, but the subtext did. Social media picked it up. Whispers turned into threads. People sent me screenshots, some with pity, some with glee. I stayed silent, reading them like someone watching dominoes fall. Mark's personal life crumbled in quicker, meaner ways. Sophie, who had boasted about starting fresh with him, panicked when she realized the receipts and messages tied her directly to company reimbursements. Her calls to him went unanswered. Her social media, which had been full of glamorous vacation posts with him, suddenly quieted as friends deleted tagged photos. She messaged me once, begging for mercy. I didn't answer. On the outside, it looked like a career implosion. On the inside, there was a human wreckage. Sleepless nights, half-hearted denials to clients, and the slow, humiliating drip of losing what he'd built. The worst part for him was not losing money alone. It was losing the projection, the image of control and success he'd cultivated. That image was more valuable than his bank account. Took that away. But cruelty isn't my style. I wanted accountability, not torture. So when HR concluded the internal review and marked the misuse of funds as willful misconduct, The legal team arranged mediation for the financial discrepancies. The company demanded restitution for the improperly billed expenses. Mark's name would likely be on public filings if the case escalated. The board suggested a quiet resignation to avoid further reputational damage. He resisted. For a while, he fought like a cornered man. In private, I made one last move that would seal his fate emotionally. I called his mother. Not to smear him. She deserved to hear from me honestly. I explained calmly what had happened and sent her the timeline. Her silence over the phone felt like a verdict before any court could speak. When she finally asked, in a voice broken with disbelief, "How could he?" I felt something like grief flicker. Not for him, but for the family that had trusted a lie. The final scene was cleaner than anything I'd rehearsed. Mark stood before a small gathering of colleagues and friends, apologized in a voice that had lost its swagger, and announced he was stepping down pending the legal process. No dramatic confrontations, no vindictive speeches, just a man exposed. I remember walking past him on the street a week later. He looked smaller than his old photographs. People still recognized him, still parsed the story into versions that made them feel clever. Sophie moved away. The company reorganized. His name was spoken less and less at the dinners and meetings where it once hovered. For me, the ending wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about reclaiming myself. I closed the folder on my laptop and deleted nothing. I'd needed those files once. Now they were a reminder of how I had taken control. I moved some savings, booked a ticket for a trip Rachel and I had always joked about, and started planning a future where trust was something I would earn for myself, not accept blindly. When people asked me later how I stayed so composed, I had a simple answer. I allowed myself to be human first, to cry, to be angry, and to heal, and then I chose intelligence over impulse. The cost for Mark was high. The price for me was peace. And in the quiet after the storm, that peace felt like a small, perfect revenge of its own. When the officers stormed in, everything shifted in an instant. My husband, so full of pride minutes earlier, suddenly looked small, cornered, like a child caught with his hand in the fire. My father's voice thundered across the room. "Federal Agent Harris, you're under arrest for domestic assault and obstruction of justice." Gasps filled the dining hall. His family sat frozen, faces pale, mouths open. My husband stammered, "Dad, this isn't." But my father cut him off coldly. "Don't you dare call me that. You put your hands on my daughter. In my world, that's not just a crime. It's a death sentence for your reputation, your freedom, and your so-called manhood." The officers closed in. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The same fear he once enjoyed putting in mine. As they led him away, his mother whispered my name, almost pleading. But I stood tall, my hands steady. For once, the shame wasn't mine to carry. I didn't just walk out of that house. I walked into a new life. A life where respect isn't begged for, it's demanded. And where justice isn't delayed, it's delivered by those who love you enough to fight for you. And that night, as the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of his family's perfect home, I realized one thing. Sometimes the strongest rescue doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you thought were just watching silently. That was the night I stopped being a victim and started being me again. And that was the night everything changed. My husband thought he could break me in front of his family, but instead, he broke himself. Justice walked in with a badge, and the mask he wore for years was ripped away in seconds. I walked out stronger, freer, and unafraid. Because when you've been pushed to the edge, you only have two choices: fall or rise. And I chose to rise. And that's how betrayal turned into justice, and silence turned into strength. If this story kept you hooked till the very end, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real stories of cheating, revenge, and redemption. Your support means the world. And trust me, the next story is one you don't want to miss.